Glad. So, good afternoon, everyone. In fact, good evening in some places of India and other parts of the world, whatever your time zone is. I am pretty fortunate today to be moderating this wonderful session around the role of incubators and how can incubators provide focused mentoring for the development of startups. It's my pleasure to be on the platform of UINCEP's IXI Summit, and I am in presence of various fantastic personalities who have been associated with startups and incubators for more than 2 decades in their professional experiences. I'll quickly introduce my panelists in the alphabetical order. I have with me Mr. Swethal Kumar. Mr. Swethal is a senior management executive with over 18 years of solid experience in finance and strategy domain. He is CEO and managing partner of StartupScale 360 for now. He is also associated with initiatives like Mubala and Hub 71 in UAE, and he's a mentor and investor to various incubators and startups all across the globe. So Swethal, welcome to this panel. I'll quickly move on to my next fellow panelist, Mr. Vinod Shankar. Mr. Vinod is a senior executive with 19 years of experience in sales and marketing, business development, and startup incubation. He is currently CEO of AIC DSU and has also served as CEO for GinServe, which is Global Innovation System, and has been a mentor to various startups in his life. I also have John with me, joining in from a different time zone altogether. Thanks, John, for taking time out at a very special hour for you. John is an EIR entrepreneur in residence and director of innovative programs at University of Pennsylvania. He is a serial entrepreneur in Edtech space with startups like Massive U and others. So my thanks to John for taking time out on a different time zone. So quickly, we are also expecting one more panelist to join in case if he joins, we'll probably also have a quick introduction for him. Meanwhile, I would like all of you to have some of these queries answered, which we have already taken from the audience before we went into this panel. I have panelist specific questions, but I would like to start with a generic query. We can go in the alphabetical order once again. The first thing that I would like to know, or our audience would like to know from from all of you, what do you see? What is the role of any accelerator, any incubator in the development of the startup? We can start off with Swethal first, then we can go to Vinod, and then we can come to John. We'll follow that sequence.
Hey, thanks, Dheeraj. Thanks for having me here. I think it's a great questions. Actually, this is a very important role which an accelerator or incubator play in any startup ecosystem. But I think it's very important for even startup to actually identify or pick the right accelerator or incubator, right? Because there are so many accelerator or incubator, but you need to see that how that accelerator or incubator is committed to basically building and scaling up the startup business, right? And what sort of a partnership they can bring in, what value they can bring in. For example, speaking about Edtech, because this is a Edtech focus forum, so I'll just take an example of Edtech startup, where they, if they have a collaboration or partnership with the right schools or universities, and where they can help, that collaboration can help co-creating the products or get the feedback from the end users, whether it's students or university teachers, or also basically give a regular feedbacks and also help them improving the products with times, right? Sometimes the endorsement from those educational expert is so important that actually it can prove your product to actually let's say it will prove more pedagogically sounds, right? So that is what it is expected in such kind of a collaboration. So hence, I think it's very important that any accelerator or incubator, when you join, you need to find out what are the values they bring in. For example, when we were setting up Hub 71 in 2019, which is a Abu Dhabi government initiatives, we ensured that we just don't want to see as just an incubator or accelerator, because it just what we wanted to see that how can we create an ecosystem around that, like how the program can collaborate with the corporate innovation lab, or with academia or research facilities, so that we can also attract the talents from those universities to come and work with startup later. Or sometimes you need to see that you can tap the or leverage on their research facility for the startups to go and do POC or pilots their product. So those are the things so important for the startup, and those kind of a collaboration helps. And so you need to see that what are the right collaborations. Sometimes also you need to look at that what is a partnership with the regulator or with the government bodies, because sometimes if you are in a regulated space, it's so important that this kind of accelerator or incubators help solving or pivoting very fast in those in this ecosystem. So that's my take, and that's my recommendation.
Thanks, Swethal. Vinod, before we come to you, I have Ajay with us. I would just take few seconds to formally introduce Ajay, and we can come back to you, Vinod, for your inputs.
Sure.
So, Mr. Ajay Batra is the Executive Vice President for the Venture Fastrack program of Bhojwani Foundation. He has been instrumental in establishing the Center of Innovation and Entrepreneurship at Bennett University. He is also a mentor and investor to various early stage startups across the nation. So, Ajay, welcome you to this panel and thank you for joining us. I'll come back to you for your inputs. Vinod, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dheeraj. So I think the role of incubators and accelerators in the startup development program has evolved over a period. So initially, startup incubators were focusing more on co-working space kind of stuff. And over a period of time, accelerators and incubators, they have actually transformed. So they will not only provide the infrastructure, which is very essential, but they will also provide industry connects, academia connects. So if any startup wants interns from the universities, they can avail them through the incubators. And also industry connects and market access is something which is very essential for any startup. So that is why the incubators and accelerators, they actually work in different ways, because accelerators will be more focused towards slightly mature startups, and it will be a compressed duration, maybe 3 months to 6 months kind of program, wherein different aspects will be taught so that the startups will leapfrog from their current levels. So whereas in incubators, it will be a longer duration program, maybe running to 1.5 to 2 years. So as Swethal also rightly pointed, so it has to be a two-way association. So incubators also need the right kind of startups, and startups also need the right kind of incubators. So in addition to training and mentoring aspects, so it has to be funding also, which has to be part of the ecosystem. So government actually gives grants to all these incubators and accelerators, and these incubators, accelerators, they can fund the startups. So if they don't have the grants in place, they can at least connect them with the right VCs and ensure that they get the necessary funding. So mentoring, funding, training, so infrastructure, all these are required for any startup, and that is what accelerators and incubators need to do. So that's my take on this.
Thanks, Vinod. Coming to John. John, you have been on the both side of the table, where you have been the receiving end from the incubation services, and you've also been part of the incubator right now, and the innovation exercise at the university. What's your take on this? How do you see how can incubator support startups?
Yeah, I agree with both of my colleagues in terms of the role of incubators and accelerators. I look at this here. By the way, good afternoon, everybody from the University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia, in the United States. I look at this through a sort of a macro and a micro lens in terms of the role of incubators and accelerators. On a macro level, I think the accelerators and incubators have to provide a venture development framework for the entrepreneurs they serve. At Catalyst at Penn GSU, we call that best practice, BEST, where we work with our entrepreneurs on business planning, usually through the lean startup, lean stack standpoint. What is your problem? What is your solution? CAM, SAM, SOM. What are the strategic drivers of the business? E, we look at the enterprise development. It goes beyond just the technology, and how are you constructing and developing your cross-functional team to be able to deploy a product, service, or solution that has a sustainable competitive advantage. S, we look at system specification. We're in a world now where prototypes and MVPs can be developed very quickly, deployed to market very quickly, tested, adapted, and pivoted very quickly. So we work with our entrepreneurs on the system specifications, and we have a great partnership with AWS, who provides a lot of support from a technical standpoint. Finally, the T, the tactical implementation of the business. Thankfully, at Penn's Graduate School of Education, we have an ecosystem of support, educational practitioners who are able to test the products and help our products develop that long-term sustainable advantage. So from a macro standpoint, it's a venture development framework. From a micro standpoint, we've constructed an innovation index that we impart with our entrepreneurs to get laser focused on what's driving value and efficacy in the education space. We look at engagement, we look at pedagogical alignment, and we look at full systems change. And we measure our entrepreneurs who are serving across that index to determine how investable they may be. So a macro venture development framework, a micro innovation index, and those come together to be able to drive value for the entrepreneurs that we support at Catalyst at Penn GSE.
Great inputs, John. Really appreciate what couple of models that you mentioned. Moving on to Ajay, your organization is also a support system for a lot of incubators in India and other parts of world as well. How has been your experience? Because you see a lot of incubators from the outside perspective. How do you see that incubators can support startups? What's the exact role of for an incubator in the ecosystem?
Okay, thank you, Dheeraj, and good afternoon, everyone. Glad to be here. So at Venture Fastrack within Bhojwani Foundation, we work with incubators around the world, as Dheeraj is saying, to help build their capacity and help them improve their startup outcomes. So we see incubators / accelerators, of course, play a very vital part in the way how global landscape has changed, certainly in the last 1 year, right? Even if you look at the latest announcement from India about the 1,000 crore seed fund, that's going to be disbursed largely through incubators. So they will increasingly play a larger role, of course, and more inclusive role in the way innovation entrepreneurship pans out in every country. In terms of the role they play, more specifically to Dheeraj's question, I think incubators have a very special role in evangelizing entrepreneurship. I think the cultural, social side of that often gets ignored against hard business results that incubators are supposed to put out, right? And be answerable to their funders, etc. But I think the soft side of encouraging youth to take on measurable, reasonable risks in an environment that is judgment-free, in an environment that is safe to fail, if there's such a thing as a fail, I think is an important role incubators play. That's one. Two, somewhat aligned to what John was saying, I think incubators over the last few years have evolved and realized, there was a lot of focus on input earlier. Let's get a big cohort. Let's select. Let's push them through the process of a 3 months, 4 months, 6 months incubation, etc. What I think incubators are, and this is our observation working with incubators around the world, incubators are becoming more serious about value that they add in that journey. So it's not just about lean starter. It is, but it's not. It's not about BMC as well or design thinking. It is really about, on a week-to-week basis, are we really moving the needle? And you need instrumentation, you need methodologies. At Venture Fastrack, we actually have a platform, so you can actually track. For an incubator, it's immense value to be able to know that they're adding value or not, rather than say, hey, 6 months are over, have a good life. There's measures and there's progress tracking along the way. So I think incubators play a huge role in keeping startups honest and showing them the mirror regularly. The other bit, of course, as everybody else has said, incubators are a single point of connect into the vast ecosystem. And I think as the pandemic has shown, our ecosystem by design have become global. Our access to mentors, investors, customers is borderless. And I think incubators are seeing that as an opportunity now, and I think it's a good thing. So by and large, I think incubators have a larger role to meet social goals, national goals, and of course, making sure every single day, every single startup moves the needle.
Thanks, Ajay. So this was the question to all the panelists. Before I proceed to my next question, I would request audience, in case if you have any sort of questions, from all of the panelists or a panel specific question, you can put it into the Q&A. Towards the end of the session, we'll try to cater as many questions as we can within the time permission. So my next question is to both Vinod and Ajay, because you guys are more with the incubation day in day out. Ajay, Vinod, you are already in the incubator, you're running an incubator. Ajay, you work with a lot of incubators. How do you see that? What incubators usually do on day-to-day basis? Let's say if I'm a startup and I'm an entrepreneur, I would like to understand how the incubator is going to help me. Can you help me understand what does incubation do on day-to-day basis with the startups and their teams?
Sure. So actually, I have worked in this incubator ecosystem for the last 6+ years. In fact, I have also seen the change, how we work, right? So initially, we were actually conducting a lot of workshops pertaining to design thinking, lean startup methodologies, all of these. Over a period of time, we realized that, the audience also, the number was reducing. So then we figured out what could be the actual reason for that. So then we realized that when it comes to mentoring, it has to be super customized mentoring. That's what we realized. So in fact, it cannot be the general GAN sessions. That cannot forever. Instead, what we do is we hold regular meetups with all these startups, try to understand their pain points, and accordingly, we'll try to fix these problems. So in fact, we have different varieties of startups at EICDSU, in fact, in the verticals of healthcare, mobility, waste management. So each startup requires an intervention of different kind. So then we sit with the startup and understand what their challenges are. And accordingly, we'll connect with the right person who can actually guide with them. So in fact, other than the infrastructure bit that we provide, so we are also housed within a university. So that actually makes it very easy to connect with other departments. For example, we have a startup which is into detection of milk adulteration, turmeric adulteration, so on and so forth. So they require labs of chemistry and then biosciences labs, all of these. So then we have facilitated that as well. So that way it becomes the responsibility of incubator to understand what exactly are the requirements of these startups and accordingly plan some action around that. So mentoring also, the mentor has to be a kind of jack of all. So he has to know the right person. He may not be the expert in all the areas. So we highly recommend that the mentor has to be the industry and with the functional expertise. For example, if a company is in healthcare vertical and they have a problem in their sales function, so then we connect them with a mentor who is from the healthcare background and who has an experience in sales function as well. So that makes it very easy for the mentor to understand the problem and bring out some solution. So if the mentor cannot address that problem, at least he should know who is the person who will be able to solve those challenges. And other than that, we also have partnered with a lot of ecosystem players. So these are in different corporates. We have set up a lot of innovation labs in association with companies like NVIDIA, VMware, IBM, GE Healthcare, all of these. So our startups utilize all these innovation labs for their innovations. And at the same time, we also have industry connect so that we can connect them with different industry partners and they will be able to address the challenges as well. So this is about the mentoring part and the infrastructure part. And along with that, the funding part. So we also get grants from the government and we also invite outside VCs and other funding agencies who will be able to co-invest with us. So that way, all the aspects of infrastructure, mentoring, training, and even the funding are taken care of. So typically, whenever startups come to us, they come for two reasons. One is the market access, the other one is funding. So if these areas are taken care of, then they would be happy in an incubator. So that is what we have realized.
Thanks, Vinod. Ajay, your take on this?
Sure. So in some way, I'll echo what Vinod said. Startups are an impatient lot. The founders have very little tolerance for gyan, as Vinod said, right? And most of that stuff is available out there, to be honest. Yet we all know, especially early stage founders, need some bit of a reflection, some bit of a guidance. So there is some learning, but I think not learning for the sake of learning, but learning by doing is the format that most incubators are adapting now. There are very few theory workshops. There are a lot of hands-on experiential stuff that happens. Rather than say, hey, this is what business model canvas is for an hour. They say, okay, 10 minutes, this is what it is. Let's just do it together. Hey, how are you doing on this box and how are you doing in that box together? So there's peer learning, there's reflection, conversation, and all that. So I think that's changing. There's a couple of other trends we are seeing over the last 6-8 months that have happened. I'd love to share that with you. One, we're realizing that more and more, as we know the saying, right? A mentor is often a little too glorified, I think. It's very hard for a mentor to provide it all, right? The model we are seeing many incubators take is to have two mentors paired up with each startup. One who's a more strategic business advisor, big picture strategy. Have you got the right pieces in place? Is the product okay? The team okay? Is your business plan coming through? All of that. And then one mentor who's either a industry expert, FMCG, for example, or aerospace, or technology expert. Typically, we're seeing the success formula usually involve two mentors giving a lot more time. Of course, there are many experts who come along the way, but two who kind of anchor the relationship as things happen. That's one trend we're seeing over the last, like I said, a year. The other very interesting trend, and I think it's largely driven by all of us connecting virtually in Zoom calls and all. Many incubators are actually questioning the cohort model. Does it really make sense to have a one-size-fit-all approach in a cadence that everybody has to go through? And it's a question mark, right? We didn't question it a year ago, but now we're saying, hey, maybe we don't need to. Maybe we don't need a cohort of 30. Maybe it is a lot more individualized with some frequency of the group to come together. But so 70% of the program is individual, and then there are meetup opportunities. So that's another trend we are seeing come through. I also think what Vinod said is interesting. One of the biggest asks any founder would have today, right? You may have been mentoring, may have been co-working about a year ago. Today really is about investor connect. So my view on investor connect is it's not just an introduction that we are responsible for. As an incubator / accelerator, I think we have to make sure startup is ready to face investors. And it's not just about pitch decks. We have to make sure their business fundamentals are good. If not, let's give them all the inputs, help them do the mock pitches and practice sessions and all of that, and then make the connections. Startups often feel that it's just a matter of one email and there's a world of investors who they'll be able to talk to. We have to be careful in managing that expectation. If done well, we would do justice to both sides, because again, as being an investor as well, I'd love to look at startup, but I'd love somebody to curate them and not flood my inbox. I think that's a role as incubators we got to start taking a little more seriously than we have. I'll pause and others share their thoughts. Thank you.
Thanks, Ajay. So I see there has been a lot of discussion around mentoring. Both of you have emphasized that it's one of the very, very core offer of any incubator. My next question is based on that, and this is addressing to both John and Swethal. Your organizations are also working with a lot of mentors, a lot of strong thought leaders, intellectually strong people who have experience of working into a startup. How do you see that? How should an incubator strategize on their mentorship strategies? How can they bring these thought leaders to the startups? What metrics should they follow to connect these startups to a specific mentor or a thought leader?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think mentorship is and we like to say not just mentorship, but coaching is a critical part of the accelerator experience that we provide at Penn's Graduate School of Education. And I think it's a question of cross-functionality of the entrepreneur. So when the entrepreneurs come to us, they have a certain skill set that we have to connect them to the right kind of entrepreneur. So if it's a former superintendent who now is becoming a founder of a new curriculum company, they may need support from a technology standpoint. If it's a technologist that's coming into the education space, they may need some support from a curriculum design or an instructional design standpoint to make sure that they know that they're developing a technology that's fit for the education landscape. At the end of the day, though, I think that the role of the accelerator has to look at Look at what's the end goal of the founder, and I think it was touched on by my colleagues, and that is the investability of the business at the end of the day. Big believer in entrepreneurial mindset, big believer in failing fast, failing smart, lean stack, lean startup methodology. But at the end of the day, after 9 months of being with us, how is this business going to be more investable? And we like to look at that through an efficacy lens. All of the usual suspects in the space who are investing in these businesses, from Rethink to Learn to Reach to Out to New Markets, they're all talking about efficacy. And when they're talking about efficacy, they're thinking about 3 key areas. And from a mentorship, we talk to our entrepreneurs about these 3 critical things. One is the sequencing by which they're developing their business. Too many of our entrepreneurs come in with a product right away, an MVP, and they say, we want to sell, we want to get it out to market. And we say, hold on, let's look at the sequence. Let's look at the underlying research that's driving your value proposition, that's driving your theory of change and your theory of practice, to make sure that that's in line with what the market wants right now. So we look at the underlying research and make sure that the sequencing for how the venture is being developed is in check. The second area that we look at as a mentor, and we coach our mentors to look at this, is the transferability of the business. We also have entrepreneurs who are very smart, thinking, I have to have a contract with an academic institution, a school district or a higher ed organization, and that's going to make me investable. We say, wait, hold on one second. It's great that you have your MVP, and it's great that you have your letters of intent with those school districts, but how is this business going to transfer from that small college or university or that small school district into California, Texas, and Florida, where the school districts are much larger? So the transferability of the business is something that we really look at. And finally, this is probably the toughest for our entrepreneurs who are post-Series A. They have $1 million of ARR. They're thinking about raising their next round. They probably have a $15 to $20 million business. We say, what is the scalability of this business? A lot of entrepreneurs get tired at that moment of post-Series A. They're like, I made it. No. We're thinking about truly scaling the business. What does it take to create $100 million business or $1 billion business? What does that mean when you're constructing your team? What does that mean when you're thinking about a scalable infrastructure of your product? And ultimately, what does that mean in terms of efficacy? The outcomes that you're trying to drive, full systems change in the global education marketplace. So our mentors are really focused on those 3 key things: the sequencing of the development of the business, the transferability of the MVP out to larger market areas to be able to have that sustainable competitive advantage, and then the scalability of the business, because the big venture capitalists are going to ask, how are you going to scale this? And if you're a 23, 24, 25-year-old first-time venture founder, that question has to be answered. So we look at it through that lens in matching our mentors to our entrepreneurs.
Thanks, John. Swethal, your inputs on this?
I think my co-panelists have covered broadly all about the mentors, and really great inputs about that. So I want to start with one thing that, when it comes to mentor, a lot of people have seen they claim to be mentor, right? But the startup is so confusing that, are they right mentor? And in reality, what happens that a lot of times startups bump into so many misfits and contrarians who eventually become a roadblock for them. So rather than help scaling up their business or helping in any shape or form, they become a kind of a bottleneck. So it's important to have a mentor who can thrive in chaos of breakthrough making. Because this is the startup, they're in the process of breakthrough making, and you need a really right person who can help them in the journey. Going for a mentor, which is a part of an accelerator or incubator, one advantage is that they have been vetted. They have a good, the mentor is already onboarded in the program as part of the. They are pretty much has a good pedigree. They have a good credential. So you actually work with the right industry experts. But at the same time, when you are a part of any cohort, now how you ensure that each mentors are actually providing good support. So it's very important that the mentor needs to be proactively involved, right? They need to be more engaging and able to communicate effectively, even be it technical or business savvy or speaks the founder's language. So it's very important that every mentor is assigned the right matchmaking. It's not that randomly, if you are a business in a health tech and somebody you got a mentor assigned who has a no knowledge about the health tech. So is there something a right fit? It's important for accelerator incubator also to bring the right connection between mentor and the startup. And the mentor needs to be someone who can be able to kind of a more of a trusted partner, a strategic partner for the startup. Can also help in anticipating the change in the business coming. Who can bring a right connections. It could be the connections of maybe the investors, or maybe kind of a bringing connections within the industry who experts, right? To kind of help in let's say coming out of some sort of MVP or doing some pilot of the product. So that's very important that the mentor who play a right role in the ecosystem or the accelerator incubator. But the question is, how do you also as an accelerator ensure that you have a right mentor? How you evaluate the performance, right? Because you will able to identify the mentor and you can see that you did a good matchmaking, but at the end of the day, what is the result? So one thing which accelerator incubator they need to do is to ensure that also engage with the startup and see that there is really any sort of a value coming out of that. Is there any output there? So there should be some sort of a KPI driven some sort of engagement should be there with the mentor, because this mentor it's a program is short. It's like you running a mini MBA, and you have to like have continuous engagement. And if you assign a wrong mentor, and pretty much it's a waste of time for the startups towards end, and they don't get any kind of any value to it. So, and again, it's fall back on the accelerator eventually, right? So that's you have a cohort of 10-20 members, and 5 out of that has really not performed, and there's no success story for them. So that's my kind of take on it.
Thanks, Swethal. Great inputs on evaluating the mentors and the similar thing. In fact, we have faced a similar problem with our incubators too. Building up on the same questions, I'll quickly come back to Ajay once again, and also would like Swethal to answer. Ajay, are you with us?
Yes, I can hear you.
So just wanted to throw this question to both you and Swethal about how do you propose an incubator to mentor the mentor? Because a lot of time we perceive that a mentor is a very right fit for a startup. It usually does not turn out to be the case. How do you see that? What should be the incubator strategy to mentor the mentor to work with a startup?
Okay, I think it's a great question, and as we are discussing, often a mentor really is a make or break for the startup. So it's a very critical part of the process. Let me address it maybe in 2-3 dimensions that we're seeing. One, I think there is a dire need for mentors to understand that mentors themselves need to be coachable. And mentoring is not just about me knowing the business well. It is the art and science of taking somebody along. The softer side of mentoring, if you will, is often ignored. So we are actually now working with a pilot with a couple of incubators where there is a psychometric done of these startups who are coming in, and of course for the mentor pool as well, and to see that there is some baseline understanding of where things are. One. Two, we often do a mentor matching based on, let's say, industry overlap, maybe because I like the person. That's great, and I think that's good. Chemistry should be looked at. The other practice is that we have a startup take a startup maturity assessment at the moment they enter. So we know where they are. We have a 5-level maturity index, so we know where they stand. And then we take it to the mentor and say, hey, are you comfortable working with, let's say, very early stage, low maturity, if you will? Or are you looking to work with, more mature, more growth-oriented, if you will, assessment startups? I think that level of upfront transparency in the relationship helps both parties. You know what you're walking into, right, as a mentor. The other bit is, of course, we encourage incubators to run NPSs on both sides. So let startup give a feedback, formal NPS on a mentor. Let mentors give the feedback on startups, right? Often we're a little harsh on mentors. I know there's truth; they're not always available. Sometimes they're pricey. I get it, but I think there is the other side as well. Often startups don't respond to mentoring. Often startups aren't malleable enough to take the advice. So I think it works both ways. So an NPS, feedback on both sides, keep all parties honest. So I think we need to take a more 360-degree view of mentoring. It's not just about matching. It's about end of the day making sure, I go back to what I said earlier, the needle moves. So there are goals established. There's tracking that's done. Are you really moving towards the outcome that you want out of the relationship? Thank you.
Swethal?
Dheeraj, that's a very interesting questions actually, and that I have seen that many of the accelerator or incubator, they don't focus on this area, because they're always in the rush of running a cohort. Even once a cohort is there, they have a time where they have to do a lot of other works in scout for the startup, do a lot of groundworks for the preparing for the next. It's like a continuous cycle, and they pretty much miss this point. I went for a mentoring certification program. I was part of a Input Hungary, which is one of the UN funded accelerator based out of Budapest. So I was selected as one of the mentors, international mentors, and we had to go through 5 days of detailed mentoring program. It's like a proper certification issued by UN for this kind of program for going through. It's like a kind of a detailed workshop where they give a lot of business tools, and they have like a proper mentor handbooks, educating about the ecosystem and communication softness side of that, and also some sort of emotional intelligence, like how do you deal with a startup. It's very important that sometimes mentor always there to always advise. They don't have time to listen. So how do you balance that? So there's a lot of great kind of a tools they provide. So it's important that a accelerator or incubator kind of run such type of a program. It's not necessary to have a 5 days, or it could be a single day or a couple of days. But those continuous awareness and engagement is also important, because sometimes sometimes the program can be very specific to any sectors. Like if the accelerator wants to run a program on it, let's say space tech or health tech. Right? Now, the mentor maybe in the previously has they were part of the general, for example, cohort. So you need to slightly change that. Now, how you can adjust yourself to those specific sector focused programs. So it's like a continuous engagement required between mentor and the accelerator stroke incubators to improve, and as well as also to for the accelerators important that show that they have a right quality of a mentors who will be their part of their journey when and where, as and when needed.
Thanks, Swethal. Before I proceed to my next question, again a request to all the people who are in this session. In case if you have any questions, you can use the Q&A part of this panel to put up your questions. If you want a specific panelist to ask a question, you can just name the panelist. We'll try to address the queries towards the end of the session. So Vinod, coming to you, you have been into this space for a good time now, and currently you work with an incubator, which is a government-funded and government-supported incubator, and you have seen this journey. I also would like to understand how can public bodies, be more involved in this process. How do you think that more support from government can be leveraged by the incubators?
Sure. In fact, there are different departments of the government, so which are supporting incubators and accelerators. Like we have Niti Aayog, Atal Innovation Mission, and we have Department of Science and Technology. We have BIRAC, we have MSME, we have MEITI. So many other departments of government which are actually supporting incubators and accelerators. So different kinds of grants are available for the incubators and accelerators. So first and foremost is obviously to set up the incubator, which could be towards infrastructure and operational expenses. And then there are also grants to scale up the established incubators as well. So then we have certain specific grant schemes, like we have Nidhi Prayas, wherein these grants are available to build prototypes from the startups. And we also have grant schemes like Entrepreneur in Residence, right? So wherein people can actually bring out their innovation and they also get a monthly stipend. stipend of around 30,000 rupees or something like that. So these are all innovative schemes that are supported by the government. And in fact, recently also we have this 1,000 crore startup fund, which will be routed through different selected incubators across the country. So these are all some of the schemes that the government has put money into and which are being effectively utilized. In fact, from the state government's perspective also, in Karnataka, we have something called Elevate, so which will actually award grants to promising 100 startups every year. So this is also a promising scheme. So that way, entrepreneurs also need to be very choosy about what scheme they want to get into. So if they want to be an entrepreneur in residence, they can apply to such incubators. And if they want to develop some prototype, so they can get into incubators which are offering Nidhi Prayas schemes. And similarly, we have Atal Tinkering Labs. So these are for schools, so that people, students specifically, they can try out different things, and that will actually cultivate some entrepreneurial mindset in them, so that they can come up with their innovations over a period of time. So these are many of the schemes that are available to different startup incubators and accelerators, and even the benefits will be for the startups entrepreneurs.
Thanks, Vinod. Just building up on this, what I also wanted to understand, this is already being done. We understand government is supporting a lot of hard infrastructure in terms of building up incubators, and there is a soft infrastructure in terms of seed support and other being given to the startups. But do you think there is anything else which also can be expected from the government in case if as an incubator or as an entrepreneur, if you would like to have a wish list from the government, what maybe top 1 or 2 points on that?
Yeah, one area could be the internationalization part of it. So wherein different linkages could be established with incubators and accelerators across the globe, so that the best practices can be shared. So there could be various exchange programs, so that each of the incubators can benefit from the best practices. So that is one area. And also there could be the corporate linkages as well, because as we know that, the incubators recognized by government, they can also receive CSR funds. So maybe the government can intervene by roping in the corporates and ask them to channelize some part of the CSR money to the incubators. So that can be effectively utilized towards building infrastructure or maybe seed funding of the startups as well. So these are two important areas where I think government can intervene.
Thanks. The next question would be to all of you. In fact, we can go in the same sequence as we have been doing earlier. COVID has impacted the incubation model, very, very deep. From the infrastructure, where incubators were actually being synonymous of the hard infrastructure in terms of co-working spaces, buildings, labs, and everything. It has moved to more virtual model now. It's more about mentoring. It's more about one-to-one and very, very customized support services being given to the startups. What's your opinion? How should incubators now look forward in the years to come? What should be their new models of working within the ecosystem? We can go in the same sequence. We can start with Swethal going to Vinod, John, and Ajay at last.
I think it's a very interesting question because we have learned a lot from this current situation. Right? COVID has taught us many ways in a sense that to kind of see the world in a different way. Before, in fact, one of our very senior executives from Mobile was saying that if you asked me 1 year before if can I able to sign a deal without traveling, it was just people were saying it was just impossible to think signing a large big transactions without traveling. Now it's like they're able to do a multi-billion-dollar transaction virtually. So I think now in my view, things are changing. Now we are so used to the virtual environment that in my view, there will be in future it could be a hybrid model. And in fact, it has given opportunity for international startups also to reach out to the international accelerator or incubators through virtual connections. Like before, there were a lot of US-based accelerators who never had opened the virtual platform. They always wanted the startups to fly down to US to kind of to be part of the program. Now they have kind of found an opportunity that now we can basically onboard many startups from different part of the globe. Many Indian startup is now able to join virtually, global accelerator. So I think this has opened a huge opportunity for a startup. Cross-border connections, and we can see how the country is also benefited, because we create a lot of networking opportunity, access to the funds, and access to the even regulators of a different geography. So in my view, I think it was a blessing in disguise that this COVID has taught us a new way. I think in future, I believe the accelerator model or incubator model would be hybrid.
Thanks, Vinod. Your take on this, please.
Yeah, I think there is a difference in the way incubators operate. So previously, a lot of incubators used to depend on incubation charges, so which will be kind of rentals for the self-sustainability and all. So now all the incubators have to think on other ways of self-sustainability apart from the government grants. So it's good that incubators get government grants, but after that, what is a question, right? So that's why we always have to focus on self-sustainability. So which could be through various areas like CSR funding from corporates, or other sponsorships, or even other mentoring and consulting charges that incubators could build upon. So, and at the same time, COVID has taught a lot of lessons. In fact, we have ventured into this virtual incubation model, wherein except for space, the other offerings of incubators are available to the incubatees. So they get access to a lot of software credits and mentoring, which could be virtual, or once in a while they come to the facility as well. So whenever they want to utilize our innovation labs, they come here and utilize that. So there is a drastic shift in the way things operate. So most of them work from home, and whenever there is a real need, they come to the facility and utilize that. So that is what we have learned. So we have to reinvent ourselves, think out of the box, and look at different avenues so that we are also self-sustainable.
John, how are things at your end?
Yeah, this is a great question. First of all, just to back my fellow panelists up, I really feel strongly that as a mentor, it is not my job as entrepreneur in residence and mentor to impart my knowledge on an entrepreneur. It is my job to inspire the entrepreneur to walk into and to leverage the lessons that I've learned as a serial Edtech entrepreneur for the last 25 years. Things like surround yourself with people who are smarter than you. Things like measure what matters, developing OKRs and KPIs to make sure that you're measuring the impact of whatever you're developing, and also making sure that you have a love of entrepreneurship, because it's not for the faint of heart. Most entrepreneurs fail, and we as mentors have to try to put you in a position to succeed. That said, COVID was really, really a unprecedented event. And by the way, we don't just look at the global pandemic as the only virus. We see systemic racism. We see global inequity, incoming inequality as also a virus and a pandemic that needs to be addressed. But as mentor, I also try to inspire my entrepreneurs by saying, never let a crisis go to waste, right? When we look at the global pandemic, we see 1 billion learners now going online. Is this going to be our moment where we go beyond the MOOC, where we have a video followed by a formative assessment, where we're actually developing 21st century skills for learners who are coming online? If you look at the financial markets, I think we had 105 or 110 deals done, $2.2 billion invested in EdTech in 2020. And that's an unprecedented growth from 2019. So while we saw COVID, we also saw the financial markets perk up and invest more in education technology. We see the financial projections that global education technology spending is going to grow at 16 to 18% CAGR over the next 3 or 4 years. What industry is growing that fast, given what we saw as a result of the global pandemic? So I would probably jump on Vinod and say internationalization is a big focus area. How do we get our incubators to think about cross-border collaboration so that we look at this not as just a US or not as just a Europe or a Middle Eastern phenomena, but a global phenomena? Our education business plan competition, now in its 12th year, has really looked intentionally at international entrepreneurs coming into our competition. We had 200 applicants last year from 37 countries and 6 continents. So we're really trying to be intentional about attracting global entrepreneurs into our competition, helping international entrepreneurs succeed in the US, and having our US entrepreneurs poke into some of the incubators and accelerators around the world so that they can be successful.
Ajay, please.
Yeah, great points there. So, of course, many lessons over the last year or so for all of us. But let me highlight a few that we're hearing incubators talk a lot about. As much as the pandemic shook the foundations of many businesses, and we know businesses have either gone away or many are suffering. It's also made incubators pause and think for themselves, and I think that's what Vinod was referring to earlier. Are we in the right business, and are we doing it right? So that moment of reflection, I think, is very important for incubators to do now, because their own viability is in question, and they must look at new ways of not just raising funds and more grants, but becoming as viable, investable as we preach our startups to be. We really have to really practice the stuff on us as much as we talk to our startups. That's one. Two, I think again the globalization angle is really sharp, and the phrase coming out of India, build in India, for India and for the world, I think is a mantra that everybody is looking at across the board. Third one, I think important for emerging economies, certainly India, I think our entrepreneurship has to become more inclusive. We are realizing how interdependent the world is, and yet each nation has to harness its own, let's say, funnel of innovation. So our incubation, our startups, and our policies around those must encourage more grassroots participation, more rural entrepreneurs, women entrepreneurs. We must think hard about innovation that are so intrinsic to our society, but also hold promise for a lot of other issues that we are trying to solve as a nation. So many areas of reflection. I think I'm hoping you asked earlier, what can government do? What can policymakers do? I think if we can, my recommendation to policymakers is if we can have a dialogue that, hey, this is where we are, and we're not out of it, right? We're not still out of COVID, but yet this is where we are. So can we agree on 3 directional changes in the way this nation looks at incubation policy? That conversation with stakeholders is a great forum, I think, for us to do. Thank you.
Thanks, Ajay. So far I see only one question which is related to Vinod. Someone wants to get connected with AIC DSU. Can you just put up the incubator contact credentials in the Q&A? That should help the audience.
Sure.
As we are moving towards the end of it, as the forum is focused around Edtech, and there has been a phenomenal year for Edtech, lot of disruption, lot of transformation has happened in Edtech since COVID happened. All of us has experienced in person, lot of your startups and the entrepreneurs you work with must have faced it. But going forward, Edtech is going to stay. There are going to be a lot of changes coming in the year or two for Edtech. My question would be to all of you, in case if in a very short time, if we can cover what should be the strategy for Edtech startups now, since the COVID has happened, how should they look at the market? How should they look at their own propositions? We can start with the same sequence.
I think there's a huge opportunity in the space. I think if you look at India alone, it's a more than $100 billion market, right? It's like around $117 billion market we are talking about, with over 350 million learners. There's a huge opportunity there in that space, and you'll see more and more Edtech startup will emerge. Because the conventional way of learning, with the blackboard with chalks and all, actually we have seen this completely transformed to the more technological ways, iPad, and you can see or various gadget. And even in India also, like the amount of funding gone last year just on the Edtech space, like $2.2 billion is gone to just in 2020 compared to 2019, which was around $500 million. We are talking about 4 times the funding has happened. I think that the pandemic actually shows the very new way of learning. So there's a complete mindset change, and people know that at comfort of home, at a very affordable price, you can get a basic education, advanced learning and all. So I think that is in my view, it's going to a positive direction, and I think in my view, more and more edtech will come. Even in MENA, we have seen the number of edtech funding has increased 5 times. Still a small market, but it's even a good opportunity for Indian edtech startup actually targeting Indian diaspora, because there's a huge Indian diaspora here who are able to now learn a different way using it, sort of using technology, which is amazing for India. A lot of they would like some Baiju, Vedantu, and many, So yesterday I was talking to one of the founders, who has like do lots of accounting well, it's a maths focus. So I was like wondering why just a maths focus, app. But he was explaining how he's differentiate from his competitors, and why this is like relevant for students at this era, especially using a technology. How can they make more? I mean, India has always been a mathematical hub, but with the use of technology, how we can even accelerate the learning in a different way, more of bringing also a soft skill side of teaching those maths. So there's I think huge opportunity.
Thanks, Swethal. Vinod, your take on EdTech?
Yeah, I think with the COVID, I think health tech and edtech, so these are two booming areas, right? So edtech has huge opportunity as well. So what I have seen is a lot of startups focus on specific areas. So someone is trying to do digital classroom, someone is trying to do attendance management system. So like that, we have bits and pieces. So I think the secret sauce, I would say, is the convergence of all of these technologies. So if the startups can actually bring all these technologies together and offer it as a platform, so then that will actually add a lot of value. So in fact, partnerships also could be looked at, because some startup could be good at a certain technology, and one more startup could be good at, let's say, digital classroom, something like that. So you bring all the technologies together and offer it as a single solution, which will serve the needs of schools, colleges, all of these. I think that will be the success mantra.
John?
Yeah, I see. I represent a major research university, so I'm going to say what I see is the rise of research to practice, or what we call it knowledge to action at Penn's Graduate School of Education. I think it's really important. In the U.S., we have the National Science Foundation, the NIH, and the DOE SBIR grants. And over the last 3 or 4 years that I've been doing this, I've seen a rise in the question: we are going to fund you if we know that there is underlying research and an evaluative model, an evaluation model to how value is being created in this startup. So I think that finally we're going to see sustainability, it's the scalability of EdTech products centering around what is the theory of change, what is the theory of practice, mixed methods research, an ability to really measure the outcomes of what's being delivered through that EdTech product, and have that be the anchor of sustainability that will lead to investability that will ultimately lead to scale. Gone are going to be the days where this startup rises, it's thrown out to market, and ultimately it fails, because more and more businesses will be funded if there is an underlying research thesis and an evaluation model that really is intentional about outcomes and systems change in the education space globally. So that's one of the trends that I see happening over the next 3 to 4 years.
Thanks, John. Ajay, quickly, within a minute, if we can also address to this.
Sure. I think in the last 1 year, EdTech in general has seen fair amount of tailwinds. But I think two things have happened. One, I think our consumption, I think overconsumption, if you will, of content over screens, we've saturated it, right? Whoever was unwilling, unable to do it has already done it. So for EdTech, amongst all the other points, I think two other dimensions we will see more action on. One, enhanced user experience. So whether it's AR, VR, combination, I think pure screen consumption is not going to last. One, two, and certainly for a country like India, we need a lot more vernacular focus in our learning solution. Mobile-led vernacular solution will be the way to go.
Thanks, Ajay. So, summing up the discussion, it was great understanding all the dynamics from you, because all of you have been patrons into this industry. I especially thank on behalf of you, Incept, and all the audience present into this session. I thank you for your time, especially Swethal and John, who have joined us from a different time zone. And John, especially, it's a very, very early morning for you. I'm not very sure that you're going back to bed. I think it's time to move to office. It's a very tricky time for you, but we thank you for your time. Probably in the last second, in case if you want to have comments, otherwise we can conclude. But it was great speaking to you. Let's stay in touch after this as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Take care.